One of my favorite historical documents about our faith is the Cambridge Platform. Have you heard of it? Raise your hand. There should be more of you. I've preached about it before. Okay, that's fine, it's okay. I'm going to tell you what it is. Written back in 1648, the Cambridge Platform was essentially a church governance document written by the Congregational Churches of colonial New England. In this document, the churches wrote up their vision for how they wanted to function and how they wanted to relate to each other. Now, the document's antiquated in a whole bunch of ways, but there are actually many wise instructions in it for church life that we continue to follow to this day. One of the big things that the Cambridge Platform lays out is the idea that covenant should be the basis for the formation of our congregations. Here's how they said it back in 1648. A number of professing Christians cannot be formed into a church without their freely and mutually covenanting to walk together in the duties and ordinances of the gospel. They may be real and visible saints, but while they remain unconnected and separate, but they cannot be a proper church without entering into covenant and laying themselves under certain obligations to each other to live and act like Christians. We might not say it like that today, but according to the Cambridge Platform, even worshiping together is not enough to make a group of people into a church. There must be a covenant, an agreement to live together in certain ways. So we might not, I'm guessing we're not going to say it that way anymore, but the reality is that the basis of our congregation is, in fact, a free and mutual covenant. We are joined together not by a shared creed or set of beliefs, but instead by a shared set of agreements about our vision for the community and for our larger world. You have likely heard me say before, and will likely hear it many more times from me, covenant is central to our faith. Now, I'll continue to say this, and I do believe it, but I also have to confess something to you today, which is that I'm in the midst of something of a crisis of faith when it comes to covenant. I love covenant, and I agree with the Cambridge Platform that we can't be a church without it. And at the same time, I'm not sure that covenant actually works. So I deeply believe in the power of covenant, the power of laying out this vision together for how we want our community and our world to be. And I'm not sure I believe in the practice of covenant, at least how we've been doing it in our faith. I'm not sure that we know how to live out our shared vision. I'm not sure that we really understand how to exist covenantally. When I shared with a friend of mine my dilemma of preaching on covenant when it's something I'm really unsure about right now, she suggested I call this sermon, "Covenant is Dead, Long Live Covenant." So that's my sermon today. Now here's the thing. Over the years, I've certainly seen covenant being used in beautiful and meaningful ways. But just as often, I've seen it used in ways that feel deeply contrary to what it is that covenant is supposed to be all about. I've been in UU communities in which covenant is treated simply as a set of rules. If you break one, you are shamed. There's no room for making mistakes. There's no room for taking risks. There's no room for trying again. I've also seen covenant used as a weapon. The accusation of being out of covenant comes with little desire to try to repair the relationship. I've seen covenant being used to try to stop disagreement, when being in covenant is equated with being in total agreement with one another. That's not going to happen in a UU church, right? In our denominational work around white supremacy and racial justice, I've seen covenant being used to silence the voices of people of color and others with marginalized identities. In these situations, staying in covenant is equated with being nice and not making anyone uncomfortable, rather than with staying in relationship even through the discomfort. And most of all, I've seen people walk away from our communities and even from our faith, rather than try to work through hurt or disagreement, or rather than try to repair the hurts that they may have caused. It's perhaps this last one that distresses me the most. In my mind, the most important part of covenant is a commitment to stay with the community even when it disappoints you, because it will. It will. Covenant is about choosing to be in relationship, even though we all know that relationship is messy. When the Cambridge Platform was written back in 1648, it was easy to say that covenant was required because people basically had to be a part of a church at that time. That isn't true anymore. It's too easy for people to take their ball and go home. And the reality is that taking your ball and going home is the easier solution. If you're looking for the easy solution, that's it. Living in community is hard. I have a friend who used to live in a 13-person co-op, and sometimes I was jealous of the depth of community that she got to be a part of. But more often than not, her stories of all they had to figure out and process to live together sounded exhausting to me. Everything from the temperature the house was kept at to whether or not house funds were used to buy cheese was grounds for an intense conversation, often fraught with emotion that had nothing to do with the actual decision. The work of staying in relationship is hard. And yet, the work of relationship is one of the most important things that we do here. This is our work as Unitarian Universalists. Our commitment to staying in relationship is, as the Cambridge Platform declares, the only thing that sets us apart from a social club or a random group of people worshiping together. It's the thing that makes us a church. And so all of this makes me wonder if we need to go back to the basics when it comes to covenant. Perhaps all of these carefully wordsmithed statements are actually getting in the way of what covenant is really about. A commitment to put the work of being in relationship with one another first. I wonder if covenant should be less about the behaviors we want to uphold and more about who it is that we are in relationship with. Perhaps our covenants are where we lay out those relationships with each other, where we lay out whose we are, who we are accountable to and responsible for. This is certainly how covenant works in the Hebrew Bible. The concept of covenant comes up over and over again in the Hebrew Bible, each time God makes new promises to a new generation of people. And those new people make promises to God. Each time God makes a covenant with the Israelites, it begins with some version of, I will be your God and you will be my people. That's where they start. That statement, we belong to each other, comes before anything else. before any other promises that might be made. So when we make a covenant with one another, we are saying that we are one another's people. Look around you for a minute. What does it mean to say that these people sitting in the pews around you or across the room or up in the balcony, these are your people? UU Minister Victoria Safford offers this reflection on the question, whose am I? Douglas Steer, a Quaker teacher, says that the ancient question, who am I, inevitably leads to a deeper one, whose am I? Because there is not identity outside of relationship. You cannot be a person by yourself. To ask, whose am I, is to extend the question far beyond the little self-absorbed self and wonder, who needs you? Who loves you? To whom are you accountable? To whom do you answer? Whose life is altered by your choices? With whose life, whose lives is your own, all bound up inextricably in obvious or invisible ways? Kind of like those ribbons bound together. What would it look like if our concept of covenant began with these questions? How might it be different than saying we behave in these particular ways? I wonder if the place where covenant begins is when we are able to declare that we are one another's people. One of the most important friendships in my life went through a rough patch about 7 years ago. We were both in our first year of seminary, which is hard enough on its own. We were both working through grief and falling into our least helpful ways of being, as one so often does when grieving. We both made mistakes that happened to touch on each other's sore spots. And there were times, a few times then, when I wasn't sure our friendship would go on. But there was this moment when things started to turn around. On a long walk together, we each admitted that we weren't sure what it would look like for our friendship to continue. But it was important enough for us to have each other in our lives that we were willing to do the hard and messy work of figuring it out. We declared in that moment that we were each other's people, and that was what mattered first and foremost. Now, this does not mean that that friendship has been 100% smooth sailing since then. No relationship works like that. But through it all, whatever comes our way, we have this foundational understanding that we are each other's people. We have a foundational commitment to staying in relationship even when we disagree, even when we touch all of each other's sore spots. And because of that, we now have a relationship of deep trust, and she is one of the closest friends I have. She's my daughter's godmother. Of course, a relationship with just one person is easier than with a whole community, right? It's easier. But I think the principles are the same. How can we learn to be one another's people? How can we stay in relationship even when we disagree? How can we build that kind of deep trust with one another? There are a lot of things about the Cambridge platform that are old-fashioned. I certainly don't want to return to a world where everyone has to be a part of a church. The fact that each person here, each of you is making a conscious choice to be a part of this community, even though you don't have to, actually makes it all the more powerful. But it also makes it easier to leave. And I don't want to live in a world in which walking away is the first solution to discomfort and disagreement. I don't have all the answers when it comes to covenant. I'm still not sure where I stand. There are days when I really don't think it works. Nonetheless, I do believe that it is central to who we are, central to what makes us a church. Without covenant, what would we be? When you strip away all the fancy words, all covenant is a commitment to staying in relationship, to working through the hard times, to stretching our hands out to one another, not knowing what we'll touch, but hoping for so much. We are one another's people, and that is what matters first and foremost. May it be so.